My father leaned close to me at the funeral. His breath trembled as he whispered, "Don't breathe. Not a word." My heart raced, confused, while the room fell into silence around the casket. Then, heavy steps echoed across the floor. The officer entered, holding a folder in his hands. Without speaking, he lifted his arm and pointed directly at my mother. Gasps broke out among the guests, and her face turned as white as the flowers beside the coffin. I knew the truth was about to destroy us all. But let me start from the beginning, because what you're about to hear will change everything you think you know about love, betrayal, and the lengths a mother will go to protect her secrets. 3 weeks earlier, my grandmother had died peacefully in her sleep. At least, that's what everyone believed. She was 82, had a weak heart, and the doctor signed the death certificate without question. Natural causes. Case closed. But my father couldn't let it go. I remember walking into the kitchen that morning and finding him hunched over grandmother's pill bottles, counting and recounting them with shaking hands. "Dad, what are you doing?" I asked, pouring myself coffee. He looked up at me with hollow eyes I'd never seen before. "Something's wrong, Sarah. The numbers don't add up." He held up a bottle of her heart medication. She had a 3-month supply. "Look at the dates. She should have had at least 60 pills left. There are only 12 here." I tried to rationalize it. Maybe she was taking more than prescribed. Maybe she lost some. But he shook his head violently. "Your grandmother was meticulous about her medication. She marked every dose on her calendar. Every single one." He pulled out her medication chart. Neat, precise handwriting tracking every pill for months. The last entry was 3 days before she died, and according to her calculations, she should have had plenty left. That's when my mother walked in. I watched her freeze in the doorway, her coffee mug trembling slightly in her hands as she took in the scene. The pill bottles scattered across the counter, the charts, my father's desperate expression. "What's all this about?" she asked, her voice artificially bright. "I'm trying to understand what happened to Mom's medication," my father said, not looking at her. Something flickered across my mother's face, so quick I almost missed it. Fear. But she recovered instantly. "Oh, honey, you know how confused she was getting toward the end. She probably miscounted or forgot doses. The grief is making you see things that aren't there." But I had spent the last 6 months caring for grandmother, and her mind was sharp as ever. She wasn't confused. She was the one teaching me how to organize my own medications, for crying out loud. My father must have been thinking the same thing because he said quietly, "She wasn't confused, Linda. You know she wasn't." My mother's laugh sounded forced. "Of course she was. Remember how she kept calling me by her sister's name? That happened once. When she was tired, the tension in the room was suffocating. I watched my parents stare at each other across that kitchen counter, and I felt like I was witnessing something I shouldn't see. My mother's knuckles were white as she gripped her mug. My father's jaw was set in that stubborn way that meant he wasn't dropping this. "I'm calling Dr. Patterson," he finally said. "Why would you do that? She's already buried, honey. Let her rest in peace. Because 60 missing heart pills don't just disappear, Linda." My mother slammed her mug down, so hard it cracked. "Fine. Call him. But you're going to look foolish, and you're going to drag our family through unnecessary pain for nothing." But Dr. Patterson's response wasn't what any of us expected. When my father called, there was a long pause before the doctor said, "Actually, Mr. Coleman, I've been wondering about that myself. Your mother's death was unusually sudden given her recent test results. Her heart function had actually improved over the past month. That phone call changed everything. My father requested an autopsy. My mother fought him every step of the way, citing religious objections, grandmother's wishes, the pain it would cause the family. But he was relentless. "If there's nothing to hide, then the autopsy will prove that," he kept saying. The waiting was unbearable. 2 weeks of my mother barely eating, barely sleeping, snapping at everyone. She kept saying things like, "I can't believe you're doing this to her memory, and some secrets are better left buried." That last comment haunted me. I started paying closer attention to things I'd previously ignored, like how my mother had been the one to suggest that grandmother move in with us 6 months ago, right after grandmother had revised her will. Like how she'd volunteered to manage all of grandmother's medications and finances. Like how she'd been the only one home with grandmother the night she died. The night grandmother died, I had been at my boyfriend's place. My father was working a late shift at the hospital. He's a nurse, which made his suspicions about the medication even more credible. Only my mother was home. She called us at 2 a.m., sobbing, saying she'd found grandmother unresponsive in bed. But now I remembered something that hadn't seemed important at the time. When I rushed home that night, my mother was already dressed. Full makeup, hair done, wearing a dress I'd never seen before. At 2 a.m., I had assumed she'd gotten dressed quickly after finding grandmother, but now, who gets dressed up to call the paramedics in the middle of the night? The autopsy results came back on a Tuesday. My father took the call in his study and emerged 20 minutes later looking like he'd aged 10 years. He sat down at the kitchen table and put his head in his hands. "Dad!" I whispered. "Digitalis poisoning," he said without looking up. "Massive overdose. They found enough heart medication in her system to kill 3 people. My mother, who had been washing dishes with unusual intensity, dropped a glass. It shattered on the floor, and she stared at the pieces like she was seeing her life break apart. That's impossible," she stammered. She was so careful with her pills. I helped her count them every morning. "Linda!" My father's voice was deadly quiet. "The police want to talk to all of us. They've opened a murder investigation." The word murder hung in the air like a toxic cloud. My mother sank into a chair, and I watched all the color drain from her face. "Murder? But she died of natural causes. The doctor said." The doctor didn't test for digitalis overdose because he had no reason to suspect it. But Dad was right about the missing pills. Someone gave her a massive dose of her own medication. I felt sick. My sweet, gentle grandmother, who made me cookies every Sunday and taught me to knit and never said an unkind word about anyone, someone had murdered her. And that someone had been in our house, had access to her medication, had been there the night she died. The police interviewed each of us separately. I told them everything I remembered, my mother's strange behavior, the midnight phone call, her resistance to the autopsy. I felt like a traitor, but grandmother deserved justice. My father was cooperative but devastated. He'd loved his mother fiercely, and the guilt of not protecting her was eating him alive. But my mother, the police spent 3 hours with her, and when she came out, she looked like she'd been through a war. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about grandmother's last days. She'd been getting stronger, happier. She'd been talking about updating her will again, maybe leaving money to the animal shelter she loved. She'd been planning to outlive us all, she joked. But there was something else, a memory that had been nagging at me. 3 nights before she died, I'd gotten up for water around midnight and heard voices in the kitchen. My mother and grandmother, talking in hushed, urgent tones. I'd assumed they were having one of their heart-to-hearts, but now I strained to remember what I'd overheard. "Can't let you do this to him. He's your son-in-law. It's my money, Linda. I'll leave it to whoever I choose. After everything we've done for you, taking you in, caring for you. I never asked you to take me in. That was your idea." The conversation had gotten heated, but I'd gone back to bed, thinking it was just family drama. Now, those words took on a sinister meaning. What couldn't my mother let grandmother do? And what did it have to do with money? I decided to search grandmother's room. My parents were at the police station again, answering more questions. The room had been left exactly as it was the night she died. As I went through her things, I found something that made my blood run cold. Hidden in her jewelry box was a handwritten letter dated 2 days before her death. "My dearest Sarah, if something happens to me, know that I love you more than words can say. I've been having troubling conversations with your mother about my will. She seems to believe she's entitled to my entire estate because she's been caring for me. But I've decided to leave most of my money to charity with a portion for your education. Linda is not pleased. She's been pressuring me to change my mind, saying things that frighten me. I fear I may have made a mistake moving in with your family. If you're reading this, please know that I died peacefully, but if anything seems suspicious, please seek the truth. All my love, Grandmother." My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold the letter. Grandmother had known. She'd suspected something might happen to her, and she'd known it would be my mother. I called my father immediately. When I read him the letter, there was a long silence before he spoke. "Sarah, I need you to take that letter directly to the police. Don't tell your mother about it. Don't let her know what you found. Dad, she's my mom. She couldn't. She killed my mother for money, Sarah. And she's been lying to us for weeks. The next few days were surreal. My mother was arrested while folding laundry in our kitchen. I watched from the window as they put handcuffs on her and led her to the police car. She looked back at the house once, and her eyes found mine through the glass. Even from that distance, I could see her mouth the words, "I'm sorry." The case against her was overwhelming once they started looking. She had motive. Grandmother's estate was worth nearly $500,000, and my parents were struggling financially. She had opportunity. She was alone with grandmother the night she died. And she had means. She controlled grandmother's medication and knew exactly how much would be lethal. The prosecution painted a picture of a woman desperate for money who saw her elderly mother-in-law as an obstacle to financial security. When grandmother decided to leave most of her estate to charity, my mother had panicked. She crushed up several days' worth of heart medication and slipped it into grandmother's evening tea. But the detail that haunts me most came out during her confession. After grandmother had drunk the tea, my mother had sat with her while she died. Grandmother had become confused and frightened as the digitalis took effect, and she begged my mother to call for help. My mother had held her hand and told her everything would be okay, even as she watched her die. "I couldn't stop," my mother said during her confession. Once I gave her the medication, there was no going back. So I sat with her. I didn't want her to die alone. The funeral was a nightmare. Everyone knew by then. The whispers, the stares, the way people avoided eye contact with me. My mother's family came to pay their respects, but you could feel the shame radiating from them. My father and I sat in the front row, trying to grieve for grandmother while processing the betrayal of the woman we'd both loved and trusted. The casket was closed. We decided it was for the best, given the circumstances. That's when my father leaned over and whispered those words that started this whole story. "Don't breathe. Not a word." Because walking into that funeral was Detective Martinez, the officer who had handled the case. And in his hands was a folder we'd been waiting weeks to see. The final investigation report. He didn't speak to anyone at first. Just walked to the front of the room and stood beside the casket. Then he lifted his arm and pointed directly at the third row, where my mother's sister was sitting. "Margaret Thompson," he said in a voice that carried across the silent room. "You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder." The gasps that broke out weren't just shock, they were horror. Because we realized in that moment that my mother hadn't acted alone. Aunt Margaret had been in on it from the beginning. The folder contained financial records showing that Margaret had been helping my mother forge documents to access grandmother's accounts months before her death. Phone records revealed dozens of calls between them in the weeks leading up to the murder, including a call the night grandmother died, after my mother had given her the poison but before she called for help. Margaret had been the one to suggest crushing the pills into tea. Margaret had been the one to help dispose of the remaining medication. And Margaret had been there that night, waiting in the driveway in case something went wrong. Two sisters, united in greed, had murdered a defenseless old woman for money they felt entitled to. They'd planned it for months, waited for the perfect opportunity, and executed it with cold precision. But here's the thing about truth. It has a way of surfacing, no matter how deep you try to bury it. Grandmother's letter wasn't the only evidence she'd left behind. Hidden in her address book, she'd written down the license plate number of a car she'd seen parked across from our house multiple nights in the weeks before her death. Margaret's car. She'd also recorded one of her conversations with my mother on her old cassette recorder, the one she used to leave voice messages for friends who lived far away. On that tape, you can hear my mother clearly threatening her, saying that if she didn't change her will, accidents happen to old people all the time. The tape was found in grandmother's sewing basket, hidden inside a ball of yarn. Even in her final days, she'd been gathering evidence, trying to protect herself from the daughter-in-law who was supposed to care for her. My mother pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and was sentenced to life without parole. Margaret fought the charges, but was convicted of conspiracy and sentenced to 25 years. During the trial, it came out that they'd been planning to kill grandmother for nearly a year, ever since they learned about her charitable intentions. The money they'd killed for, the estate they fought so hard to claim, every penny went to the animal shelter grandmother had loved, just as she'd intended. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. I visit my father regularly now. He moved out of our house, couldn't stand living where his mother had been murdered. We talk about grandmother often, remembering her laugh, her stories, her endless capacity for love. We never talk about my mother. Sometimes I wonder if there were signs I missed, red flags I should have seen. But the truth is, evil doesn't always look like evil. Sometimes it looks like your mother, making breakfast and asking about your day and tucking you in at night. Sometimes it sits at the dinner table and says grace and helps with homework and seems like the safest person in the world. The woman who raised me, who taught me to ride a bike and helped me through heartbreak and celebrated every achievement. That same woman suffocated a helpless old lady for money. And she did it with the same hands that had comforted me through nightmares. That's the part that haunts me most. Not just that she did it, but how easily she lived with it afterward. How she comforted my father when he cried about losing his mother. How she helped plan the funeral for the woman she'd murdered. How she looked me in the eye every day and pretended to grieve. But grandmother had the last word. In her final letter, she wrote, "Truth has a way of surviving, even when we don't. Justice may be delayed, but it's never denied to those who seek it with pure hearts." She was right. The truth survived. Justice was served. And though it took months to surface, grandmother's pure heart had guided us to both. The woman who thought she could get away with murder learned that some secrets are too big to stay buried forever. But the story doesn't end there. Because 3 months after my mother's sentencing, I received a package in the mail that would shake me to my core one final time. It was from grandmother's attorney, with a note explaining that she had left specific instructions for this package to be delivered to me exactly 90 days after her death, no matter what the circumstances. Inside was a small wooden box, the kind she used to keep her most precious jewelry in. But it didn't contain jewelry. It contained a key and another letter, this one sealed with red wax, something I'd never seen her do before. My hands trembled as I broke the seal and unfolded the paper. Her handwriting was shakier than usual, as if she'd written this in the middle of the night in fear. "My dearest Sarah, if you're reading this, then my worst fears have come true. I pray I'm wrong, but if Linda has done what I suspect she might do, then there are things you need to know about your family that go deeper than you can imagine. The key in this box opens a safety deposit box at First National Bank, box number 1247. Inside, you'll find documents that will explain everything, not just about my death, but about deaths that happened years before you were born. Your mother didn't become a killer overnight, sweetheart. She's been practicing. I should have spoken up sooner, but I was afraid. Afraid of what it would do to your father, to you, to our family. But silence protects no one except the guilty. Check the box, Sarah. Learn the truth. And then decide what justice really looks like. All my love, Grandmother." I sat in my car outside that bank for 2 hours before I found the courage to go inside. The safety deposit box was small, but what it contained changed everything I thought I knew about my family's history. There were medical records, death certificates, and newspaper clippings dating back 15 years. My mother's first husband, my biological father, who I'd been told died in a car accident when I was 2, hadn't died in an accident at all. He died of heart failure, alone in his apartment, at the age of 31. Healthy men don't typically die of heart failure at 31. But the most chilling discovery was a life insurance policy in my name that my mother had taken out just 6 months before grandmother moved in with us. A policy worth $300,000, with my mother as the sole beneficiary. She hadn't just killed grandmother for money. She'd been planning to kill me too. The documents showed a pattern spanning years. Her first husband's death had netted her $50,000 in life insurance. Her mother, my other grandmother, had died suspiciously young of natural causes 3 years later, leaving my mother another inheritance. And now, with grandmother dead and a massive life insurance policy on her own daughter, she would have been set for life. I wasn't her daughter in those final months. I was her retirement plan. When I brought these documents to Detective Martinez, he sat in stunned silence for nearly 10 minutes before speaking. "Sarah, you need to understand something. When we arrested your mother, she asked to speak with you privately. We assumed it was for closure, to apologize. But now I think she was going to try to finish what she started." The final twist came during my mother's psychological evaluation. The psychiatrist discovered that she had been slowly poisoning me with small doses of arsenic for months, causing the stomach issues I had been having that no doctor could explain. Not enough to kill me quickly, but enough to make me sick, weak, and dependent on her care. She'd been conditioning everyone around us to see me as sickly, so that when I eventually died naturally, no one would question it. Just like she'd done with her first husband, making everyone believe he'd been having heart problems for months before his death. The woman who tucked me in at night had been slowly murdering me during the day. In the end, my mother's true body count was 4. Her first husband, her own mother, my father's mother, and she'd been working on me. For people who trusted her completely, who never saw it coming because the killer was the person who was supposed to protect them. She died in prison 2 years later, not murdered as some kind of poetic justice, but from the same heart condition that ran in her family. The irony that her own heart finally gave out wasn't lost on anyone who knew the case. I kept one thing from grandmother's safety deposit box, a small photo of the two of us from last Christmas with a note on the back. For Sarah, who has the courage to seek truth even when it hurts. Love always finds a way to protect us. She was right. Love did find a way to protect me. Even from beyond the grave, grandmother's love guided me to the truth that saved my life. The woman who thought she was the perfect killer learned that love leaves behind evidence that can never be destroyed. And sometimes, the dead speak louder than the living ever could. If this story moved you, or made you think about the people in your life differently, please like this video and subscribe for more true stories that need to be told. Share your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one.